Welcome in, everyone. Welcome to the Buddhist Wisdom Podcast. Today, my guest is Deborah Tull, Buddhist teacher, Buddhist author, meditation teacher, and just all around amazing person that I feel so lucky to talk with today. And welcome, Eden. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, Scott. Really happy to be here with you and here with those who are listening. Yeah,
wonderful. So Eden, just for all you out there, has written. And is it okay if I talk about your book while you're here?
Go for it. Mm-hmm.
Eden's has written really an incredible book. We're here to chat as fellow meditation and Dharma teachers, but we're also here to talk about her new book. And she's really written an incredible book called Luminous Darkness that, the publishing company reached out to me, and I was reading, and we know each other from Gen X conferences, right? I think it was 2018 or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah. We could talk about the Gen X if that comes up, but the conference of Western Dharma teachers. And anyways, the book is sent to me, and I just started reading and fell in love. It's just such an amazing book. Congratulations! I'm so happy for you, for us, that it's in the world. So I just wanted to start with that.
I appreciate that, and this was a book that was quite an internal journey, a different one than the two other books I had written, and also really took courage, really took guts. So I'm grateful that the product of the beautiful and courageous process I went through to write it has been touching so many people.
I can't see how it wouldn't. I mean, in one way, as we get into the content of the book and how you relate to the content, it does also feel like a book people need to be ready for. It's definitely accessible to anyone, but I think that the core message is I don't know if it feels like that to you. It felt like that to me.
Yes, and even when I first got the message that I needed to write a book about darkness, I had to go into an inquiry internally around what is the right timing for this book to come out, because darkness is not a popular topic.
No.
My feeling and intuition was, with all that we're facing, we're entering more of a ripeness where darkness and the question of what is luminous darkness becomes more meaningful. More people are ready for that. But, I spent the pandemic finishing this book, and the timing was right when it came out. But at the beginning, there was quite a bit of pushback. Publisher was saying, can we change the title? Darkness could be mentioned in the subtitle. Yeah. But no, I really wanted to write about darkness. Yeah.
I'm so glad you did. Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because when I first saw the title, for luminosity is an English word we use to translate Tibetan terms in the Tibetan tradition. Usually relates to the unity of appearance and emptiness in the mind.
Yes.
And or clarity and emptiness, and then the word darkness for me is so ripe. So when I saw the title, I kind of was like, oh, like it piqued my interest. But at the same time, I also thought of that like, oh yeah, it may be tough for some people to kind of like they're gonna have to open it.
Yeah, they're gonna have to open it, and they're going to have to. And the first part of the book really invites people to examine, acknowledge, and then let go of some of our conditioned ideas about what darkness is, and that entire very rigid duality between dark and light, holding darkness as inferior, light as superior, and all the ways that impacts us. Personally, that impacts the lens of racism and xenophobia, and then on the spiritual path, the ways that impacts trying to get to the light, trying to transcend, kind of enlightenment held as a above the body and reach through transcendence kind of concept at times.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. And I'd love to get into that. What you just said, I feel it's very challenging to get that across in plain language. in the sense that, one of my struggles with traditional Buddhism, and maybe this is just, I don't know how you feel about this. It's also a question. Maybe it's like a stage we have to go through where where we create this duality, this kind of Godhead of awakening or Godhead of, whatever the Dharma represents to us. And it becomes something we chase, but we're kind of like chasing our own tail is what I started to say lately. So I don't know how you feel. You mention it, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. Well, I love that, chasing our own tail. Symbolic for how we chase light, trying to get away from this experience, away from our shadows to something more enlightened, trying to pit spiritual practice as something that leads more to catharsis and an arrival point, rather than, can we, folks, really strip it down and go down into our bodies, our connection with the earth, into presence in a way that's courageous enough to embrace the full spectrum of yin and yang, dark and light, and to acknowledge that that's really what our practice essentially points to. But so much of the maybe spiritual language, sometimes so much of the culture humans have created, even around spirituality, upholds that kind of duality. We're just funny that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't, I'm thinking of one Tibetan Buddhist teacher. He sometimes, he does not disparaging it by calling it this. He's just appropriately naming maybe where this has a place. He calls it Cinderella Dharma. Like, and he used the example of like, if there's a small child or a baby, and he's not trying to insult anyone with this, he's just, we have to all look at our own mind and see where we're at. Yeah. If you see a baby or a kid moving towards the ledge of a cliff, that has 1,000-foot drop, you're going to do anything you can, and you're going to wave toys at them. You're going to say, hey, come here. Yeah. So he kind of equates, he uses the term Cinderella Dharma as well as this kind of like a lot of the, initial foundational ways I think it's presented in traditional Buddhism is coaxing a baby off a ledge, essentially,
That's great. Yeah. I really appreciate that metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a sense, it's sort of, for me, what you're describing is this, it's, like in my path, I think I didn't realize how much dogma I was, adhering to in myself. It wasn't anyone else putting any dogma on me. It was just my own, belief system that I didn't equate that I was shifting one belief system into another. I was talking with a student yesterday. It's sort of like belief systems are fine. Like we all actually need them just to get out of bed and go to the store. We need a belief. And it's just, and I think the problem is when we don't recognize or acknowledge there's a belief. And
yes.
My Dharma path for a long time was kind of like that. It wasn't acknowledging that had to shift.
Yeah. And then the added challenge of, sort of due to the intersubjective nature of conditioning, there's these shared collective conditioned beliefs that we hold, that if our neighbor's holding, if our partner's holding, and our friends are holding, we're much less likely to examine if other people in our Sangha are upholding, such as light is superior to dark on some elemental subconscious level. So this being such a path that requires a badass willingness to really examine, to be bored of belief, right?
Yeah.
To really examine, what does it mean to be free from conditioned belief? Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So much of how you describe darkness as a metaphor, not only resonates with me, it's just something that I've come to in my practice over time, my own relationship to what you mean by that. But I'd love, you already shared some, but I'd love for you to share a little more with the listeners, kind of this aspect of darkness and in the title and luminosity in the title, just to introduce it a little more.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, just an awareness that when I began diving into my spiritual path, I think there was very much an approach of still really trying to effort my way to enlightenment. to get somewhere, to get free of something. Sort of the solo, heroic, spiritual warrior
Yeah.
approach, where I
Yeah.
was somehow doing battle uh, against the dark to get to the light without naming that consciously to myself, that kind of energy. And that energy so much reflects a lot of the collective conditioning that's come from the imprint on all of us
Yeah.
of disconnect from the natural world, patriarchy, colonialism, extraction of the earth, capitalism. We could go on and on. But to name the impact of all of that conditioning, one of the symptoms is such a disrespect for the yin as opposed to the yang. So there I was in the solo, heroic, spiritual warrior mode. And something about the path of meditation and stilling and emptying really brought it back to not just emptying out of duality, such as light versus dark, but getting to remember the generous, steadfast, unrelentingly beautiful teacher of darkness alongside the teacher of light, and getting to surrender and soften into the yin or elemental darkness, the force in nature, which is exist in balance to the light, to the yang, but which is again very underappreciated by the dominant paradigm.
Yeah.
The great power of that yin elemental darkness. So we can think of darkness really as a many-sided gem. I noticed when I first started writing the book, I don't want to shed light on darkness, and darkness represents the mystery, the field from which everything arises and to which everything returns. It represents the yin, or still, slow, quiet, gestating aspect of nature, the restoration aspect of nature and consciousness, as opposed to the yang, doing, attaining, producing. And so I kind of set out, how can I write about this? I use a lot of inquiry in the book to help people not draw conclusion around darkness, which would be shedding light to it. I want to focus, through light, we want to focus on the rational mind and on conclusion and on putting things in categories, but give people a sort of journey themselves, or a recognition of their own deep journey that's already existed into luminous darkness, into the fertile darkness. And this is such an important aspect of practice. So I'll pause there. I could say a lot more.
Yeah, I'm sure you could. Yeah. No, thank you so much. That's a great and deep introduction, into it. And I think, there's one element. Well, one thing in the book I'll say is there you have a lot of kind of like they're guided meditations, but they're written. You're asking people to pause. You're asking them to, engage with the practice intermittently. So I really appreciated that. I just want to, point that out. And it is in the spirit of what you're saying. For me, something I came into a tool of is I call it, similar to you, I call it non-conclusion based living, or non-conclusion based Dharma practice, or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
And to me, there's this element that if curiosity isn't the base for that practice, it tends for me to go into that aspect you were talking about, that sense of chasing the light, which on a very raw level for me, I'm not sure, I'd love to hear your experiences with this. That usually means trying to wiggle, I call it wiggle, or, get out of, or resist, or avert any kind of pain I'm going through, emotional, physical, relational, whatever.
Yes.
And so yeah, there's just so much there. To me, those were the parts that resonated so much with me in the book, as well as kind of, we do have some life experiences in common. I want to get to also later in our conversation. But yeah, I love, Yeah, I also wanted to,
Yeah.
people to know real quick, your background a little bit. You spent a lot of time as a Zen monk in a monastery, so that's a big part of your background. I was a monk as well, and so you know, yeah, I'd love to get into that too.
Yeah, we have a lot to explore together, a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
overlap. And maybe just to begin with, that phrase of chasing light, and I use the phrase sun shining in my book,
yeah,
just this kind of spiritual bypass, um, this kind of turning away from pain, that's so core within the dominant paradigm. And I
yeah.
talk about growing up in the city of Los Angeles, going through a lot of grief as a young person, which I'll talk about, but just being aware that the culture was sort of madly sunshining. Like the quiet message
Mm.
was, you better keep things positive, keep things surface, don't go too deep,
Yeah,
uh, keep things comfortable. And that really deeply detracts from our ability to drop into the human experience and its richness together and to be real together. Then, on to the next thing you were saying, towards the beginning of the book, I use the metaphor of walking through the dark, thicketed forest. I live here in the mountains of Western North Carolina, abundant with green forests, and the
I love
kind
it.
of
Yeah,
qualities of curiosity and receptivity and attunement, tactile listening with our whole bodies that we access when we are in an environment which calls us awake. And when we're in the dark, where we're not being guided by
hmm.
brightly lit signs or by the rational mind's brightly lit signs of knowing. And we're really invited into, I talk about it a lot in the book as a need for endarkenment alongside enlightenment, resting in that I don't know, and then drawing upon this curiosity, this inquiry that you're naming such a core aspect of practice. And something I want to emphasize about that, because I really feel that we need to develop these qualities within us. They already exist, but many of us have not been guided and encouraged to develop, again, the more yin receptive aspects. But as we navigate both the spiritual path and also all the shit that's going down in our world today, the unknown, these qualities can support us so fully. And I would just add that when I really feel and sense into that quality of curiosity and um, even within the field of this conversation, the kind of curiosity that we're offering to one another rather than a conclusion focused conversation or extractive kind of listening.
Yeah,
It's really an expression of nonviolence. Curiosity and inquiry are innate expressions of nonviolence, really being willing to be with one another, to be with what's happening in our own human experience, to be with the world through
yeah,
inquiry rather than putting things into categories. And those categories tend always to feed hierarchical perception, which the book talks a lot about: light
yeah.
versus dark, good, bad, right, wrong, superior, inferior, which has been the cause of so much of the mess we're in. So I'll stop there, but I really appreciate you touching curiosity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So much there. I'm trying, yeah, I'm really appreciating your shares, and what you're offering through this. Um, I was curious. So just to go back to the title a little bit. So your take, so to speak, or your experience with this and what you're sharing through the book and your teaching around the luminous aspect, if I'm gathering it, is that dark. We're not trying to bring light to the darkness. The darkness has luminosity itself. That's
You got it.
yeah,
Yes, yes. And also that it's only through opening our hearts to darkness, taking it out of this category of something I'm trying to push away, uh, that we get to receive and recognize the reality that on one level there is no dark and no light. Life exists in constant spectrum and
yeah,
continual flux and change and the sacred interplay of light and dark. And there's light and dark and light. The symbol of the Tao I always love, that has in the middle of the light a drop of dark, and in the middle of the dark a drop of light, and that
yeah. That's
that's
right.
that really frees us from just our insistence on binary perception, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful way to. I usually use. I like how you're opening up my vocabulary in the sense of binary perception or hierarchical perception or being or doing. I
Mhm.
usually use the word duality,
Mhm.
right? But would those be kind of synonymous for you, more or less, like those
Yes.
three terms?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And I just think it's useful given what we're navigating in our world today. I
Yeah.
find the phrase hierarchical perception particularly useful because it helps
Hmm.
people to investigate. And there's some exercises in the book specifically investigating this, just the higher, lower
Yeah.
nature of how the mind categorizes, and to look at, come on, folks, let's be honest. What has been the impact of you perceiving this own living being through that, and
Yeah.
other beings you cross paths with, and whole groups of people, and all of it? Yeah,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
really
Totally.
be free of the seed of hierarchical perception, to recognize that awareness isn't carrying that. That's our overlay. We're bringing it forth. Humans really invented it.
Yeah.
And people say, well, but doesn't hierarchy exist in nature? But here's the thing, even
Yeah.
if um, maybe the lion carries much more might, and through our model of the food chain, much more power than like the mouse. Um, are not the lion and the mouse equally held in innate value
Yes. Yeah.
through
Yeah.
the heart's perception?
Yeah.
So, yeah, we did invent hierarchy. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like it's a necessary. Well, maybe we could, we could have a conversation if it's necessary. A necessary, kind of like when there's duality in good and bad, hierarchy sort of
Mhm.
pops out as a representation of that duality, right? I mean,
Yes,
that's yeah,
yes, yes, you got it. Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah. It's an interesting one. You're actually inviting me into a new curious, open question, so to speak. An open question for me. Some of them they're not, I try to keep them open for as long as possible, but I
Mhm.
have open questions that have lasted 15 years.
I'm with you. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, they continue to be open. But I do have this open question on hierarchy. Yeah, and we don't have to what do you call it, dwell on this too much, but because yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, there's a sense like at least some expression, you're aware of this, but just for some of the listeners who might not be, in Buddhism, fundamentally, there's no good and bad, because every sentient being is at their base free, at their base awake. We call this Buddha nature, or has an awakened nature as their. You use the word innate. Sorry, what was the word you used?
Perhaps innate goodness.
Yeah, innate
Or,
goodness. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to express this, and I
yes.
find that in traditional Buddhism, the Buddha nature teachings are often, I find, to be the deepest. But even with just for me, just a simple understanding of this is so helpful, because it does take us out of that hierarchical, where yes, a lion is different than a mouse and they can do different things, but it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't affect their innate worth. Oh, that was the word you used, I think, innate worth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it is fascinating. I think that word worth is also very significant in today's world. And
Yeah.
again, pointing to the dominant paradigm, so much struggle around worth, so much messaging, which has been enforced by um, all of the isms, certainly capitalism, of the sense that people need to try to prove their worth, that your worth is based on how much you produce and do and achieve, and all this complex misunderstandings around worth. And what a gift that we have the simplicity of practice, bringing it back to innate, already existing wholeness.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Immeasurable worth, not based on anything you're doing or producing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, on this topic of hierarchy, I wanted to raise something up to see your thoughts
Sure.
on it, get your
Yeah.
thoughts on it.
Yeah.
But I think we're on the same page, with talking about,
Mm-hmm.
are you aware of a Tibetan Buddhist teacher named Kondro Rinpoche? It's one of the few female kind of recognized as a tulku
Yes, but I
teacher.
don't know much in depth. So.
Yeah. Yeah. She's quite a force. She's quite amazing teacher.
Mm-hmm.
She had a comment. I don't know if her views on this have changed, but it's just sort of a comment I heard a while ago where she was saying something about hierarchy. And she was saying that, when, and you know how Tibetan culture is pretty hierarchical. There's
Mm-hmm.
pretty set.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of closer, I see, to an indigenous culture than anything else. I mean, it has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
elements of indigenous cultures. And so there's a sense of sort of role. We would call it hierarchy from a Western
Mm-hmm.
perspective, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
sense of role, and there's a finite amount of roles one can go into. One can go to the monastery, one can be a farmer, one can,
Right.
do that, etc. Anyways, she was making this point. She said it wasn't on the natural hierarchy issue, but I've heard that point from other Buddhist teachers. She was saying that when there's not an overt hierarchy, and she kind of delineates between healthy hierarchy and unhealthy hierarchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like she would
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge there can be unhealthy hierarchy. She was saying, trying to gather my thought of it. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that hierarchy, if it's not over, if we don't have an overt kind of system in place, then what happens is covert hierarchy, which is worse. Because, and she said a lot of so-called democratic thinking goes into this category because the idea is that everyone is equal in role and ability and all these things, but then what happens is a covert hierarchy, which creates a lot of chaos. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Just that I think it's a really important topic for conversation, between people of different backgrounds and walks of life. In the Sangha that I guide and a lot of the trainings that I guide in collaborations with other teachers, there's a deep pulse of inquiry into moving from power over to shared power and power with. And what is the felt experience, and how do we, through practice, through how we show up, through relational mindfulness, which is the topic of my second book, how do we really, really nourish and encourage fields of shared power? And what is the damage and harm and violence that's been caused on so many levels we can't even count through the power over model. And I think it's interesting, I think it's such a human tendency to create cultures based everywhere we go, even if we're active, engaged spiritual teacher, that are somehow feeding power over models that are somehow, and I think so it comes from so much deep wounding, and the lack of modeling of what else we could be creating. So I think it's a very alive and important conversation. And that phrase that she used of covert hierarchy, yes, I think it takes, I always like the phrase being a Zen detective, or really paying attention at a subtle level to what are the power dynamics going on in any relationship, in any group. There are power dynamics. So how do we work with those skillfully, but how do we bring as much awareness to hierarchy as possible so that we are not, feeding covert hierarchy. Yeah. Does that resonate?
Yeah, and it's okay too. For me, it's just still open question. I just was really curious your thoughts on it. It does resonate, and I think especially I was having this, I guess, kind of, I don't know if it's daydreaming or contemplation this morning, but just really treasuring my relationship with my core students lately, and just really feeling very. I feel this often, but sometimes it comes more as a reflection and feeling of there's a lot of appreciation and gratitude for them. And also I often reflect, I don't know, daily, but very frequently on the power dynamics and on my role in relation to their life and how, they're relating to me and I'm relating to them. And I think, I love the questions you're asking, and I love the perspectives because I think a lot of us as Western Dharma teachers, we feel this pull that this isn't, we're not in Asian Buddhist cultures. We didn't grow up that way. Although I do feel this is a separate topic that we should spend some time relating to them as a humble student, and not co-opting them so quickly into something else, or I call it a form of colonization. But But anyways, that's a separate topic. But aside from that, it's sort of like, yeah, more and more the pull I feel is like, how do we hold a role within someone's life, but we're not above them? And I think, and that's the tricky part. I'm also not their buddy, it's like,
Yes.
it's such a
Yes.
tough line.
Yes. Not above them, not their buddy, not feeding or inviting every party to bring awareness to the invention of the pedestal in any field of relating that creates higher, lower. And, I think just by more and more of us teaching, being so willing to be seen as we are, to be naked, to be transparent, to be courageously honest, and also to really encourage everyone on the path to take agency for their own practice.
Yeah.
It's the dynamic, the reciprocal dynamic, right, between teacher and student or mentor and mentee. And some of what I write in the book about this, comes from the shadow side that I experienced, and many people listening probably can relate to, of just the ways that, because Buddhism has been informed, like so many other institutions in our world, through patriarchy, that there is the shadow of hierarchy in many of the forms, and that even at the monastery where I trained, where incredible training occurred, there was this shadow that was not contended with, that was not brought forth honestly, of a really unhealthy hierarchical structure, and a lot of harm caused by it.
Yeah.
And also a lot of delusion enforced by it. So to help people bring more and more awareness to that, and again, as we've talked about, not coming to conclusion, this is a conversation I feel that is just starting to gain momentum in even really conscious circles, but that it's a lived inquiry is important. And I know it's been such a rich inquiry in my Sangha. What does shared power look like? How can, wherever we go, we learn and be willing to model that out of respect for our collective, and to just notice where we can keep stripping down and stripping away the old model. Yeah. And one more thing about it, you said this in your own words, but just to not detract from the exquisite beauty of discipleship and the profound love we have for our teachers and those who have gone before us. It's not to detract from that, but it's to bring in enough of accountability and honesty and awareness of power dynamics that it's healthier.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, and I do see a slight difference in how this gets embodied depending on the context. So like, we don't have to go into it now, but Vajrayana Buddhism is very, very specific in how the teacher-student role happens, and it's actually very profound in the sense that it's very similar to this one of the ways you described the metaphor of darkness, which is a lot of it I find you can't know until you're in it and you're engaging with it, and so it's almost we use this term sometimes in Vajrayana Buddhism. It's almost self-secret. But from the outside, it can sometimes look dysfunctional because there's devotion involved and things like that, and also there can be unhealthy power dynamics,
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But there's kind of two things I want to, just listening to you, I wanted to also invite, bring into our conversation, which is, there's kind of two things I've noticed of impeccable teachers. I've had contact with impeccable, meaning they're not perfect, but impeccable in that their intention is clear, and they're also navigating their own darkness and the impact their intention has, and they're navigating that, and they're adjusting, and they're working with, to me, it's very much like we work together. It's not like I know or my teacher knows the answers for anyone. It's just we're working on enlightenment together. I very much feel that. And so within that kind of spirit of we're working on this together. I've noticed really teachers I respect and appreciate, especially in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there can be because of the Vajrayana model of guru student and that guru word being so misinterpreted and the
Mm-hmm.
culture of
Mm-hmm.
sanghas sometimes, and it's just, I see it as it's a growing pain of one tradition moving from one culture to another. But there can be a lot of giving away of one's agency,
Mm-hmm.
and I did this initially in the beginning, meaning like, projecting onto the teacher, they're enlightened. So they can have my power. And it doesn't happen consciously. It's something very unconscious, I think, for a lot of people. And some people, eventually realize that and they take their agency back. But what I found with with very scrupulous and teachers I respect a lot is they never take that agency. They never they never take the bait. They always deflect and give it, they don't even, I don't know. And sometimes that can feel uncomfortable. Like I know with some of my main teachers, them not taking the bait on that actually felt like a rejection in the beginning.
Uh-huh.
But what it was I realized later was just such kindness, just putting the mirror back to me,
Incredible generosity, incredibly skillful response coming from humility. And as you said, not taking the bait.
Yeah. Because it is bait. And I do feel darkness is a great metaphor in the way you use it as well, for also our journey as Dharma teachers. Because I mean, I don't know about you, I'm engaging plenty of darkness on a daily basis. And I think you are, otherwise you wouldn't have written this book. And I also mean that in all areas of my life. So, engaging that darkness in relation to my role as a meditation teacher, engaging it in my relation, to my role as a husband, a father, friend. And I think it's sort of, at some point, I want to hear you kind of already spoke to this, but I'd love to see if there's more to mine here together, which is the sense of like, at some point we just have to recognize, and there's nowhere to hide, and that if we really want to wake up, we can't hide. And then we turn over every area of our life it's so uncomfortable. Like for me, it's still very uncomfortable.
Yes. And that willingness to embrace discomfort resiliency and to recognize, before coming to practice, we think of uncomfortable as, oh, I better go in the other direction because I'm trying to sunshine, right? Dominant paradigm is showing me that in order to be a happy or successful person, I'm supposed to keep things light, right? And that it's actually, we learn quite the opposite, that the depth of awareness and love that is who we are is not othering, is not excluding anything. And in order for us to remember that and align with that, we have to start turning towards rather than away from everything that's uncomfortable. It doesn't mean, please listeners, don't take this to mean that the path is always uncomfortable or that, exercising the story that practice is just hard work. No, that's not so. But that we need to embrace discomfort as exactly something that the balm of love that our curiosity is can meet. So you're not asked immediately to embrace all of it, to celebrate it, just to begin to turn towards it with this inquiry. And I'm going to go back, I think, to nonviolence, that it's so really violent to be categorizing life in the ways that the conditioned mind does, and to be turning away from one half of our existence, one half of nature and consciousness, if we're turning away all that we consider dark, and to also be using the term darkness to justify sort of pushing away in a closet all that which we don't want to contend with. And so as you were talking, I just got this beautiful felt sense of the humility and generosity, the weave between those two qualities, that everyone on the path who's willing to live in the question, to question together, to not so much come to conclusion, to walk through the dark together, to meet the unknown with absolute reverence and respect, and to recognize that we are continually navigating the unknown. Contending with the mystery. And as you were talking, I had such a feeling of love come up inside, that it's an offering of love to live in this way. And it's both soft and vulnerable, right? And carries an immense, immeasurable strength to it as well, because it's such an expression of the commitment of being willing to be awake in this moment, regardless of what is, right? To whatever
That's
is.
totally, yeah. And, I'll share something, and you and I have kind of death in our families as an early experience, an early life experience. And I'd love to share one passage from your book, if that's okay, in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I just had a death recently of one of my main root teachers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche.
Mm-hmm.
He died last week, and he, I had this moment. What you were just saying, the reason I thought of it is, I had this moment. I was kind of sitting with a mixture of grief, like incredible gratitude last week, and just like, and also just feeling his mind everywhere. I mean, one of the beliefs in Vajrayana perspective of the Dharma is that when we all die, we get to encounter this thing called the Dharmakaya, which is our raw enlightened mind. And most people, unfortunately, don't recognize it because they didn't train to recognize it. So then they kind of their consciousness moves on. But practitioners can rest in that clear light mind, and more or less, I don't know. It's so hard with language because we're in this. I don't want to ruin our beautiful collection of language here, but they're able to kind of stay in that experience, right?
Yes.
But it's actually beyond impermanence or impermanence. It's something beyond any kind of way we can think. Anyways, so I was trying to tune into that in this sense of like his mind. And that's what I was going to say. There's a sense, I don't know if it's, this is kind of, I don't know if it's just how I think of it. I have heard other teachers express this. There's a sense of that Dharmakaya mind. We want to think of mind or self or other as being somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. As being, something. And there's a sense, when we try to understand what Dharmakaya is, it's not something that's location based because it's everywhere. It's kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so, I just felt that so strongly sitting with, he was in meditation for 3 days before he fully left his body. His breath stopped, but then he remained in Tukdam for a few days. And so I was just connecting with his enlightened mind, or, his mind in that space of clear light, the luminous darkness, so to speak. Yes. And he, anyways, I got this impression. I don't know how to put it in words, but you just sparked it for me. This sense, this sense of like the full leaning into the chaos of what life appears and looks like. And that, like, this courage you just spoke of, I don't know if you know much about Lama Zopa Rinpoche, but he was like the embodiment of a bodhisattva. There was just this, every second of his life was lived for the benefit of others. And that's, was his main teaching most of the time. And he didn't sleep. So he stopped sleeping about 40 years ago. And he's just like, just these qualities that are kind of superhuman. But when I really look at his activity, that's the thing I kept coming back to, this courageousness to open to others consistently and abundantly, generously, all the time. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's amazing. Because if I look at my experience and my kind of edges, that's so challenging sometimes because of my own limitations, my own inability, to stay in the language of our conversation, to meet the darkness of that relationship or moment with that relationship or situation. And I just was like, wow, that is a true enlightened quality when someone's able to be that just full time. That's what I felt from him. Mm-hmm. And so I just felt this sense of like, I don't know, just the openness from him that is kind of like fully in darkness. But as you're starting to point out, it's not dark in the way people normally, that is the luminosity, because there's this expression of courage that comes from that. Right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm so touched by you sharing about him. I'm going to look him up and learn more about him after this, and just acknowledging his passing, and my heart is with you, and acknowledging the immensity of your own direct experience in the wake of his passing, of feeling his presence everywhere, and reminding us that one of the other teachings of darkness is when we are caught in a light-centric world and caught and distracted and seduced as we get by the sense that the material world is what's real, physical form is what's real, what we see is what we get. We forget the entire backdrop of darkness from which all form arises. And again, we forget the medicine of non-local awareness, as you're saying. It's not that you felt him everywhere, not just here. And in this, there's a quote from Rilke that came to mind and heart as you were speaking that I share in the book, but something about you describing the generosity. I hear this inclusivity in his willingness to open, not excluding anything or anyone. And so this is a poem by Rilke called The Night.
Yeah.
And he says, "You darkness of whom I am born, I love you more than the flame that limits the world to the circle it illuminates and excludes all the rest. But the dark embraces everything, shapes and shadows, creatures and me, people, nations, just as they are. It lets me imagine a great presence stirring beside me. I believe in the night."
Wow.
Rilke always says it so well.
That's in your, is that in your book? Is that quoted in your book?
Yeah. When I first began writing the book and I told one of my mentors, who's Joanna Macy, about the book, she walked right over to her bookshelf and got out that poem. It was like this. And we just hung out with it for a while. Yeah.
That's so cool. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Without further ado, and then I'd love to,
Mhm.
I like to flag things because I forget them otherwise with guests, is that I'd love to talk about sort of also the process in a few moments of leaning in. How do we lean into darkness? Because I think, we're talking a lot about it, but, I would like to share part of your book first, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
This really touched me. And and let's see where we go with this. So to the listeners, we're gonna continue with a little darkness theme. We're gonna continue with that a little more. So So this is in the chapter on the passing of your father. One quick thing I'll say to the listener: what I so appreciated about your book, and I don't know if this was the editor or what, but you went into so much depth on luminous darkness as well as practice. I'm leaning into it somewhat in the first few chapters, and then by the time I got to this part where you start to talk more, about this very profound, like one of the most challenging experiences we can have in our life, losing a parent. It was so it was the perfect timing. I don't know, like if you would have started the book with that, I don't know, it wouldn't have had the same impact for me. So I don't know if you have any. You don't have to comment on it if you don't want to.
I would just say that, I think, and you can feel into this as you're a teacher as well. When a teacher writes a book, it's an offering of teaching. What's the process of teaching? What's the evolution, the emergence? And there's a really kind felt sense, right, that we hold as guides for how to help people learn. And I'll just point out the word facilitation comes from the root to make easier consciousness, right? So I think whenever I write a book, I'm clear that I'm giving a teaching and there's a process through which people learn. So thanks for saying that. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. I thought of what actually I also wanted to say around it too, was like, I felt so grateful to you in the sense, like, it felt by the time we got to this point, it's quite intimate. And I felt really, I want to express that gratitude to you for inviting me as a reader into that intimacy in your life. Cause it was like, I felt like you were, I don't know, it felt like this point where you're like, okay, the reader got to this point, so now they're invited into more of my darkness in a way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very beautiful. Okay. So, it's not a long passage, but, On the night of my dad's funeral, my younger sister and I slept at a friend's house with our closest girlfriends. My mother needed a rest, and my friends were encouraged to help cheer me up. We were preteens and liked mischief. So on that night, we tiptoed downstairs to sneak cookies from the pantry, steal a bra from the teenage sister, and put it in the freezer, and toilet paper at a neighbor's house. I remember the aftermath of my father's funeral as feeling surreal. Despite the good intentions of my friends, I gave birth to a part of me then who could numb out to pain at will. I learned how to use food, socializing. Sorry, I'm getting teary. Yeah.
Take your time. Yeah.
I learned how to use food, socializing, and reading to stifle feelings that my world was not safe. I had lost the core source of security in my life and had to face fears I had not known before. I learned then how to go through the motions, that everything was okay, to fit into community, to fit in with the community. I began to understand that good times were the preferred state of connection. I learned then to put a smile on my face in every circumstance, even while shedding tears inside. What I actually needed then was permission to grieve for as long as it took to move through loss as a sacred rite of passage. I did not need the modeling of appearing to be okay, quote, but really support for bringing closure to life as I had known it. I'd experienced loss before when my grandparents and uncle were killed by a drunk driver on a curvy mountain road a few years prior, but this was different. This was my father. I needed guidance on how to inhabit my body and stay present through tumultuous, earth-shaking emotions I had never felt as I witnessed my father's body sicken and decay. I needed support for integrating the lessons of loss, and I needed guidance as I stepped into the unknown to meet an entirely new and unfamiliar phase of life. Above all, I needed to understand that death was as natural as birth. I needed reassurance that I would be okay without the companionship and protection of my father. Yeah. Wow. I'm tearing up because first of all, I'm just connecting to the beauty of your experience here in its darkness as well. And my own relationship, when my mom died, what happened and all.
How old were you, Scott, when that happened?
I was older than you, so I was 6. Did I turn 16? Yeah, about 16 years old, maybe the end of 15 years. Yeah.
How did she pass?
She had cancer, so it was. I think your father's passing. He got cancer, and then it was kind of a shock because they said he had a month to live, right?
Yeah. It was a misdiagnosis of melanoma. And I just want to say there was something really kind and generous of you reading that passage. And I had tears come up as well. And just the fact that you did it, this is such a simple and foundational and shared human experience of radically facing impermanence for perhaps the first time, and loss of life as we knew it, and in a paradigm that, at least for me, didn't have the support and the wisdom, and even noticing there were very few adults who knew how to relate with me then. I often felt people trying to cheer me up, or this sense of let's get you through grief as quickly as possible. That expectation was there, even though grief is such a wild, forceful, powerful expression of organic energy that needs to be held lovingly as it takes its time and pace, right? And just for us all and listeners too, to recognize the coping behaviors we picked up, the survival strategies we picked up in those times when we were not met with the care and the recognition of what we were going through, and the love and the permission for darkness. When that's what was happening.
For me, it's very similar. I mean, she had a what I was getting to is she had a longer battle. It was like a 2 year decline,
Mm, mm,
and that,
mm, mm,
there's several points in that, the emaciation, you know,
mm,
I didn't want to see my mom. It wasn't even, it wasn't just the death, right? It's the seeing them deteriorate and seeing, what real impermanence looks like of the
mm,
body and of this human life.
mm,
But yeah, what you were stating there. Yeah, I remember it at her funeral. She's buried on a hill in the Bay Area overlooking Half Moon Bay, uh,
mm,
in the San Mateo County. And I remember I was so pissed off and annoyed with everyone there. Now I feel bad because also they're grieving, and but as you're expressing, sort of, I felt this. It wasn't, people would, I didn't feel genuineness from people, even though I'm sure quite a few of them were being genuine. But there was this sense, as you expressed too, of kind of like the grief wasn't being allowed. And I think that was where my anger came from. I think anger was also a form of resistance to my own grief. But I remember kind of walking away from the funeral, meaning she was being buried, and I walked away and sat on my own, kind of on the hill. And I had such a profound. I mean, to me, that was the start of my Dharma path. Actually,
mhm,
I
mhm,
had something spoke to me, in that moment. I was just looking at the sky, and I just got this deep insight. I don't even know how to describe it in words. It was just something like, "There's more," and that was the only kind of moment for me that I remember some, you know, lightness, so to speak, but or at least
mhm,
like hope.
mhm,
But yeah, I
mhm.
went back home and just punched holes in cardboard boxes in the garage, as because there was a Jewish funeral, so people were coming to the house for 3 days, and I was just like, leave me the fuck alone. It was so challenging. Uh,
Yeah, I can so relate to what you're sharing and to that anger piece and just the natural, the wisdom of anger as an expression to this sacred grief is not being recognized. It's literally not being given room and space by this society who's
yeah,
playing a game where we're so pushing away death. Um, and just how that feels as a young person. Yeah.
yeah,
And just something coming up around, it sounds like for both of us, that experience of like, there's something we're supposed to be fitting into instead of feeling this and
yeah,
being with this. And the beauty of Dharma conversations, the beauty of Sangha, and the beauty for the ways we bring relational mindfulness into our ordinary everyday life that allow for welcoming for the full human experience, that
yeah,
allow for conversations where heart mind is integrated and there's room for all of it, that allow for discomfort, that allow for awkwardness, that allow for just everything that we bring and carry, just that basic relief. My teacher used to say, practice makes people a social relief. And one of the things around that is like, we don't have interest in social conditioning or what's considered etiquette, or like
mm,
that becomes so boring when we instead recognize what it is to meet the multidimensionality of being human in a down to earth, real, honest, transparent way where it's all
yeah,
welcome. Just that, where it's all welcome. The joy, the ecstasy, and the grief and the
yeah,
pain. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally, yeah, yeah. For me,
Mhm.
that's been the process of, welcoming, recognizing that the welcoming is not as painful as I think it's going to be. I think that's an element
Yeah.
of darkness too. It's like we have this predisposition to avert because we think it's going to be more painful than it actually is.
Yes, or we think it's going to take a lot more work than it actually is without
Yeah,
recognizing that holding things in aversion, resisting, turning away, it is draining so much of our life force. It is causing so many people to feel numbed out to their vibrant vitality. Like the turning towards is easy in a sense because it's just bringing into our awareness the all that is. And that's a softening. Softening is relaxing, folks, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean there's not profound trauma to be with and meet sometimes in that darkness, fear to meet as we face that darkness, doubt. But we have what it takes. True natures can carry you. It's got it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I love how you brought up the cultural aspects around death as well. I mean, there's something in there that I really resonated with too, was I don't know if it was your experience. I mean, you described the teenage experience of kind of like naughtiness coming out as a way for your friends. I don't know if it was your friend's idea or your idea, but I had the same thing. Mine was a bit more X-rated. So, but the day of my mom's funeral, I was part of the punk rock community in the Bay Area, and the punk band I was in. My friends were like, "Okay, we're going to take you out at night." There's this sense of like vice being the answer. Because I think there's this sense of like anger and aversion, and like you were naming, the sense of like we can't feel all that, and then what's going to replace that is vice, or some sort of materialism. And so we went out, and this is the first time I'm admitting this, but I feel it's kind of necessary. We went out and just got really drunk and went to they took me to like a strip club, and I remember feeling so awkward. I mean, the drunk part I was okay with, but because I was drinking at a young age, and I don't know, it didn't. But I felt so even more disconnected. I remember being there, being like, "What the fuck am I doing? My mom just died," and it was like this strong sense of like aversion to me of averting. You know what I mean? But it was just so natural for my friends to be like, "Oh, let's do this. This is gonna cheer you up," and it's like the ultimate dude like thing to do: go get drunk and go to a strip club.
Right.
At like 15 years old.
Well, two things come up for me as I hear you talk about that, and one is just the severity of where we will go to try to get away from intense feelings. And there is no feeling more intense than grief. I mean, come on, we're all being asked to feel so much grief about the loss of living systems on our planet right now, about what's happening in this country. Holy shit. About racism and xenophobia. And we're all bearing witness to the ways, the very humbling ways that many people are turning away from, or turning up the notch on disconnected entertainment and trying to keep sun shining and all of that, right? It also strikes me just because there is such I spend some time holding conscious grief circles. One of the fields of work I guide is called The Work That Reconnects, created by eco-philosopher Joanna Macy. And through that work, there's a lot of conscious grief circles and rituals, one called the Truth Mandala that I guide quite regularly, for honoring our pain and love for our world. And it just strikes me that it is also really important to go down into our bodies, to connect with Eros, to connect with our mythological body and experience. I don't know, maybe something about going to a strip club stirred that as well, but like something so primal. We need to meet grief from not a heady place, not a numbed out place, not a rational conversation place, and not a place that disallows the full spectrum to be there, but from very conscious, compassionate, and primal place within, right? I wish I was given that space as a young person. Instead, I clamped down. I had to do some years later of somatic healing work around my fifth chakra and jaw for that sort of planted on smile or keep things pleasant kind of approach, because I was feeling so much inside, right?
Totally. Yeah. I love that you brought that up, that again, including, for me, that experience of sexuality, we could just do a whole nother podcast on that. Sexuality
and because we should. It's so important. Yeah.
You're most welcome. I would love that. Because I think you're naming something. I mean, for me, it was sort of like you caught onto it. And that's one of the reasons I shared it as well, is sort of like the things that are so, I don't know, so raw, like our
Mhm.
sexuality, and then how those get twisted, through modern representations of avoidance, basically, of
Yes.
entertainment, of like how the masculine, the unhealthy masculine sees that we need to act that out or be, and especially because I was still actually, I mean, technically I was I was a boy. I mean, I was a
Mhm.
teenager, but I would say I was more of a
Mhm.
boy than a man. Those senses got ingrained in me, and there was always that uncomfortability because there was that shift, because there's the darkness of sexuality, as an example, that, like I said, we can do another podcast on that, but to me there's a whole doorway there, and
Oh
and
yeah.
and why sexuality I think is so ripe is because it's one of the most powerful doorways for going. I feel it gets very, there's no middle way. It just sort of
Mhm.
goes to extremes. Either
Mhm.
way, it
Mhm.
either opens
Yeah.
and becomes a
Yeah.
vehicle for awakening, or it just goes, if we engage it, it goes down a
Yeah.
dark path. So
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
there's
Yeah.
such a paradigm in our world of repression versus explosion,
Yes, exactly.
as
Exactly.
if
Yeah.
there's two options. So, yeah, I would just say I think we should schedule that conversation because I
Yeah.
think people would benefit from it deeply. And it's a really rich inquiry. And just on this topic, because we got here through starting with grief and then
Yeah.
the primal energies. Um, there's a section in the book called the verdant cavern of the underworld,
Ooh,
recognizing that when we're pushing away darkness, we're generally pushing away uh, such a rich, vibrant field of primordial
yeah.
experience that exists in our bodies. The sex spirit divide and body spirit divide are part of this light versus dark
Yeah.
duality. And I share in the book a lot about, because you spoke of anger, when I finally became a monastic and I arrived there, and like the first 10 days was picturing like, oh, I'll arrive to the monastery and I'll start relaxing into this deep Zen peace. And instead, I met like my anger, my rage, to a degree to which I never had. I named this part of me Electra because she was electric with anger. And of course, it was all this energy that had been repressed and pushed down. And luckily, my teacher was brilliant and gave me a wide, spacious field and encouragement to not demonize the anger as a non spiritual, or to really embrace and get to know this part of me. But it's just so important in today's world, especially where there is so much intelligence in claiming our emotions and really feeling as part of the natural feedback system for the earth. I think all that does pulse through us in response to the tumult of our times. Does that resonate with you?
Totally. Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah. Let's schedule that. Because I think, there's a book that's impacted me lately heavily, a book called Work, Sex, Money by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I think it's his best work,
Mm,
hands down.
mm,
Um, but it does relate to what we're talking about, because, like, often work, sex, money are the things that trigger our afflictive emotions the most, and
right.
that they're the things that bring out the dark, and then we refuse that dark, and often we're fighting with the darkness around that. Actually,
Yeah.
for me, I don't know, for other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and just one piece we haven't touched so much. This has been
Yeah.
such a rich conversation, and we could go on for hours. My
Yeah, sorry.
sense,
I know the time. I
we
actually,
really could.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And then I have a request.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to name that there's also a way that pushing away this more of our primordial experience, our primal experience, pushing away eros and our earth body is a way of really clinging to, like we cling to egocentricity,
Yeah.
anthropocentricity. And
Mm,
also, I love the phrase wake centricity that Andrew
mm,
Holichek invited me to, of kind of focusing on the domain of day, the human built world. Again, this materialism of what we see is what we get, forgetting that we are expressions of Gaia, and forgetting our animal bodies, and forgetting to honor the wilderness, both externally and internally. So that's a whole other piece, but just to darkness helps us to reconnect with something beyond anthropocentricity.
Yeah, wonderful.
Our familiar orientation. So go for it. You're on.
Yeah, I know. I know we're at the end of what we scheduled, but just a request, if you have a few more minutes, I'd love to share with the listeners some, just before we close, some ways you lean into your darkness. I mean, you share a lot in the book, but if there's anything you want to share here, because we've talked so much about it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So let me see what's alive in this moment around this. First, what's arising, just so simple, but the deepest encouragement for everyone to really, really be generously welcoming of all of those experiences that make you feel vulnerable. Vulnerability, I believe, is actually the pathway, the gateway to authentic power, to the shared power with that we were talking about earlier. And everything that we tend to label dark is also in some form making us feel vulnerable. And if we're willing to really turn it around for years, and this has to do in part with I got bit by a tick when I was a monastic and had Lyme to navigate for a number of years. A great teacher of darkness. One of my greatest spiritual teachers was Lyme. But that willingness to fully be with the vulnerability of our personal experience, of our shared experience, and equal to that, to be willing to spend time in physical darkness, whether that means closing the eyes, or in Zen, we have quite a practice of softening the gaze, of just pausing often, or even going through your day with a soft, receptive gaze where the eyes are not actively trying to attain anything. They're not one-pointed, but more, we might say, tuned in to perceiving wholeness, perceiving through wholeness. So to play with the soft gaze and to simply allow physical darkness to be a teacher, like bring curiosity to being in the dark, to noticing how your other senses open in the dark, to questioning as an inquiry in the very way that Scott has framed, not looking for conclusion. What is darkness, if not the absence of light? What is my experience of this darkness? And to just see what begins to unfold. Yeah. There's much more I could say, but encourage people to pick up a copy of Luminous Darkness and to engage in some of the practices and exercises. And there will also be some retreats and online offerings on the topic, so you can learn more on my website about that. Yeah.
And I'll put your website in the notes in YouTube, but where can people reach you? Just
it's my full name, DeborahEdenTull.com. And I run a nonprofit called Mindful Living Revolution, and you can find me there through social media. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Eden, it's just like, wow, this has been, I didn't expect, the shares I shared to come out, but, I think it's a testament to your also seat. I was going to use the word power, but your seat as a human being and teacher. So just really, really appreciate this. Yeah, it's been really
wonderful. I feel so touched, Scott, to connect with you in this way. I feel like we were in the same room physically, just going into a place that was really intimate. And thank you so much for the presence that you bring.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to more. When an hour and a half or a little less than an hour and a half goes by so fast, I'm like, okay, we got more to talk about.
I'm with you completely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. And everyone, please check Eden out. And all, like I said, I'll put the links in YouTube. Yeah.
Thank you, so Scott. Thank you, everyone listening.